Hello and welcome to Confessions of a Gen Activist, True Crime Stories. I'm Kelly Green, and these are my stories. We left off on last episode near the end of the millennium, 1999, with some action work and some volunteer work up in the old growth forests of northwestern Alberta. And we're starting to get involved with the new and burgeoning anti-globalization movement and activist movement, which was peaking in November of 1999 with the Battle of Seattle. I talked a little bit about that, I think, in the last episode. And in Edmonton, there was a new organization called the People's Action Network, or PAN for short. And this was set up by a few local up-and-coming younger activists, university-type age kids, if you will. We called them kids. Our generation of activists, we're not even 30 yet. At any rate, they started organizing together, and one of the meeting places that they would get together was the Gordon Ramsay building downtown on Rice Howard Way, and this is where I had an office for Rainbow Bridge Communications and Dragonfly Productions up on the third floor. It was the same floor that the Eco City Society had their office down at the end, and the Western Canada Wilderness Committee held an office on that floor as well. So for quite a while, it was an excellent meeting place of young activists and environmentalists, and we would meet there on a regular basis to organize a variety of different actions. There was a number of caravans that were put together to travel down from Edmonton to Seattle to participate in the battle in the Battle of Seattle in November of 1999, where it was a large gathering of people from all across the political spectrum to oppose globalization measures. Essentially, it was the race to the bottom. I talked a little bit about that before in previous episodes. One of the events that we'd hosted in Edmonton was a teach-in on the south side at Queen Alexandra Hall, I think, close to Scona. And one of the guest speakers was Maud Barlow. Now, she's still very active in Canada with the Council of Canadians. She came out and gave a talk about globalization and quite possibly what that had to do with water rights. I had videotaped that and made some basic VHS dubs in my apartment and started sharing out those videos around. It was kind of the first time I started doing activist video and distribution. And it seemed like there was a little bit of a thirst for that. And I would get into it later on in a couple of years from then with the starting of Boiling Frog, a lovely little activist organization that I ran for, I don't know, 8 years, 10 years, something like that. It was a long time. I did a lot of great things with Boiling Frog. But that'll come up in some later episodes. First, we're trying to get out of the millennium. I end up taking a trip to Toronto with Elena. We took a drive out there. It was a personal little trip. There wasn't actually any activism involved in that trip. It was quite nice. We went down, we traveled through the States there and back, which is quite nice. And one memorable aspect of that trip was while driving through the Dakotas, either north or south, we come across a flock of geese. I can't even call it a flock. It was massive. Like for minutes and minutes and minutes, we're driving through geese. The sky was filled with geese. The land on both sides of the highway filled with geese. Millions, tens of millions of geese in February. This stage, getting ready to come back to Canada. It was quite the sight. When we eventually returned back to Edmonton, we started organizing again with the People's Action Network. There was a meeting taking place again at the Kelly Ramsay building downtown. We're up on the third floor in some common space, and the window was open. And downstairs in Rice Howard Way, a delivery truck, a diesel delivery truck, was just sitting there idling, and the fumes were coming up the side of the building and in the window, and it was just gross. And if anybody knows me, I'm not a fan of exhaust, especially diesel exhaust. Also at that meeting, right around the same time as this exhaust overwhelming us, somebody from Greenpeace had come by the meeting and had asked if anybody was there that was available to be an activist and take part in a direct action against the tar sands. Of course, I immediately put up my hand and said, I'm your guy. I'd been wanting to get involved in official Greenpeace actions for a number of years, ever since starting work with them way back in 90 or 91. So this was quite an exciting opportunity to be involved with, and I was all gung ho. So this was March now of 2000, And the plan was to block a giant piece of equipment. It was called a coker, C-O-K-E-R, a giant coker, more than a football field long. Took a special truck and trailer to move the thing. It was manufactured in the south side of Edmonton. Max, I've shown you the place where it was made. It's not too far from the House of Wheels indoor skate and scooter park. So this giant piece of equipment, the night that it was leaving, we did a blockade on 51st Ave. A very short blockade, kind of a symbolic thing. But the next action, the big action, was to happen the next morning. It was scouted out by Grade Jones, former director of the Western Canada Wilderness Committee, or maybe they were still active as the WC Squared, the short version of them. At any rate, he'd scouted it all out. We'd gathered in the early hours of the morning and all drove out to a way station stop just as the highway turned into maybe it was Highway 63. I don't know. One of the turnoffs going north up to Fort McMurray. There's a way station where this giant truck had to stop, and of course they get weighed out and everything. And we rolled in with several vehicles and a concrete barrel or a barrel filled with concrete. There was 3 of us. I was locked down underneath the bottom of the trailer with an Australian Greenpeace activist, Stuart. Elena, who I traveled out to Toronto with earlier and was a part of the Chinchaga Wilderness Expedition. She was locked into two barrels. She was locked into these 2 barrels, one arm in each side, one arm in each barrel, that was placed in between the cab and the trailer of this truck. And then on top of the coker, like it's tall, like it's a few stories up, 2 activists, including the current Minister of Climate Change and Environment, the Honourable Stephen Guilbeault. He's a cabinet minister in the Canadian government. At that time, he was a Greenpeace activist standing on top of this giant coker. I'm locked underneath. Elena's locked out front. We had Tucker Gomberg as the media liaison, and our climate campaigner, I can't remember his name. There was a bunch of us. Of course, the police came and the news media came, and it was all a big hullabaloo. And I'm committed, I'm locked down. We're all wearing fairly warm clothes and all layered up nice. It was hard for the Australian to endure. It was minus 15, minus 20 with the wind, and not much blocking that wind coming across the cold open spaces. So it was a chilly day. We lasted the day until the Greenpeace campaigner pulled the plug on the event and said, we'd had enough. I guess we'll all go into custody now. So they took us into custody, including, for some reason, the media liaison, Tucker Gomberg. He was taken into custody as well. And we were all taken by the RCMP to Bonnyville, RCMP station, I believe. Now, while we're in our cells at the Bonnyville RCMP station, waiting to get printed and photographed and whatnot, it had made the news, so it's on the dinner time news. And back in Edmonton, a young girl, who was a daughter of good friends of ours, Susan and James, Coral. She's the young girl. You might remember the story of the young girl who was born on the same day we hung a giant banner off the high-level bridge, a 3x3, so 9 square sheets of messaging to stop clear cuts in northern Alberta. The day we hung that banner off the side of the high-level bridge was the day that Coral was born. Now, fast forward a number of years later, and Coral sees that we're all getting arrested on TV for this Greenpeace action. Now, she recognized me, being friends of Susan and James, and friends of hers as well, and she was visibly upset. She's like, "Oh my gosh, look at that, it's Kelly, he's getting arrested." And she was all upset, and her or James or Susan came up with the idea of sending a message to me while I was in jail. So they figured out what detachment we were at and got the fax number. For those of you who don't know, fax was this technology that lasted for a couple decades, where you're able to send a document through a machine, and then another document, which was a photocopy or a facsimile, would come out the other end. Now we've got email, so we don't need that. Anyways, she sends a fax to the Bonnyville station, basically a letter of support. It was very, very warming. I've got it here somewhere. Maybe I'll share it with you in its entirety at some point. Very, very moving. So we were all charged. This is now my second criminal charge in defense of the environment. We're all charged were released. Sometime down the road, Shell, they dropped the charges, but they put a restraining order. There's a restraining order, I guess, that's put against all of us activists, not to go near any Shell buildings or equipment or what have you, henceforth. Now, this would come into play a few months later down in Calgary, where the World Petroleum Congress was gathered for their annual meeting. And during some of the protests in the downtown Calgary, where all the large oil company offices are, headquarters are, Tucker was arrested again because we were outside a building that belonged to Shell, or maybe it was Suncor, one of these companies that had this injunction against us. He gets arrested for breaking that injunction. Next thing you know, there's dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds of us that are marching down and protesting outside the police station in downtown Calgary, making a great big giant ruckus until they released our good pal Tucker Gomberg. That was a pretty fun action, and it was a fun week building up to that. A lot of different fun protests in and around downtown Calgary. I had even had an opportunity to attend one of those rallies, one of those protests with my young nephew at the time, Dustin. I was staying with my sister Vicky in Calgary and her young kids during that summer, and yeah, it was nice to bring him along, show him some of the activities that I was involved in. He didn't grow up to really get into much activism. I carried on with it. In fact, he's doing very well for himself, if you want to look at it from a mainstream perspective. He's got a good job. He's pulling down good money, but he also works he does work for one of the giant pipelines. That's all I want to say. I don't want to cause any wedges that shouldn't be. He knows how I feel, and that's that. At any rate, while I'm staying with my sister in Calgary, before that, the Ruckus Society, they were an organization out of the United States, and what they were doing is they were going around doing activist training sessions for folks on the anti-globalization issue. So teaching people how to do blockades, civil disobedience, nonviolent resistance, climbing, banner making, media relations, everything you can think of for being an activist. They were running these training sessions for them. So they had organized a training camp just west of Calgary on a gentleman's land who I think at the time he was fighting oil and gas development down in southern Alberta. At any rate, he opens up his land for the Ruckus folks to come out, and they put on this huge, several day long peace action camp in the foothills of Alberta. It was lovely. I went out there and took part. Tucker was out there. That was lovely. A lot of other real close friends and good activists. I think that was the camp that David Williamson came down and brought his Camp Shack bus and set up a steam lodge as well. I've had a picture on my wall for a number of years that shows the Big Dipper in a time-lapse photography of the peace action camp at night. It was lovely. That's totally an aside. So this peace action camp, it was great to connect with a bunch of friends and re-up our skills, learn some climbing and some rope tactics, and just generally be more a part of that. We got to role play what it would be like to have provocateurs in our midst. So provocateurs being people that are pretending to be activists but actually working for or are police that come into actions and screw things up, basically cause mayhem in order to turn the police against the crowd and thereby turn the public perception of the protest against the activists themselves. And this was something that was fairly well documented throughout the late 90s and early 2000s at anti-globalization protests. And we don't know if we had any police infiltrate either the actions later on that summer for the World Petroleum Congress meetings or for the camp, but we did have an undercover media person who came to the camp posing as an activist, but he was actually working for a newspaper, and his whole thing was just to get the inside scoop on what these crazy activists were doing in southern Alberta, gearing up for the WPC. So that was all very exciting. Big summer. We'd gone through a lot. I had the Greenpeace action in the spring, the Peace Action Camp, and then the World Petroleum Congress actions in June. I'd retreated a little bit after that. My sister had moved, Auntie Vicky had moved from Calgary up close to Edmonton near New Sarepta, Alberta. And I was staying with her out at her place one morning, early fall, I guess late summer, and on the news comes a story about former city councillor Tucker Gomberg running for mayor in Toronto that fall. Wow, that was pretty exciting news. I picked up the phone and gave him a call to congratulate him on his efforts for jumping into the Toronto mayoral race. And in true Tucker fashion, without missing a beat, he just simply asked, "Hey, why don't you come out and join? Why don't you come help out the campaign?" I didn't have a job at the time. I was kind of in between things, and this is definitely right up my alley of continuing on my work as an activist and sharpening and using my video production skills and photography skills. So I agreed to burn out to Toronto again. Another trip to the Big Smoke to join up with Tucker Gomberg, Angela Bischoff, and their very, very excellent campaign, Gomberg for Mayor 2000 in Toronto. So I get out to Toronto. I've got no job. I've got no money. The campaign has agreed to pay me an honorarium of $20 a day in order to help them out. It ended up being full-time plus, like every hour of the day, unless I was sleeping, we were working on the campaign. Tucker himself, I don't think he slept during that campaign. Honestly, he was up all the time. He was always on. And it was very much a huge challenge to try and keep up with them, not only in the hours worked, but following them around the city and on bicycles and just all the different campaign stops and platform launches and actions that he was doing along the way, whether it be throwing down the gauntlet, aka hockey glove, in front of Mel Lastman at a community event, challenging him to a debate because Mel Lastman would not debate. So challenging him to a debate and then getting hauled off by the police himself. Or, again, challenging Mel Lastman to a debate, holding up a rubber chicken in the Scarborough Mall as we approach him, and Tucker holding up this chicken, and "Why won't you debate me? Why are you chicken, Mel Lastman?" And then getting accosted again by security and unceremoniously tossed outside of the mall. And all of these adventures, there's many, many more. All of these adventures I'm following along with a video camera and a still camera, capturing the whole campaign, and every night trying to put together a short little video of the campaign highlights, which ended up becoming 2 compilation videos throughout the campaign that we were distributing on VHS. And a number, it wasn't every day, maybe every second or third day, but we put out a lot of these short videos with the extreme help of editor Jonathan Culp, who had a tiny little editing space set up in the hallway of Tucker and Angela's apartment. It was a 1-bedroom, but it was a large 1-bedroom. We had Tucker and Angela at one end of the suite. Myself and Jean were sleeping on the floor in the living room. And we had the editing bay in the hallway. And then all day long, there's volunteers coming in and out because it was also campaign headquarters. It was quite crazy. So following Tucker around on those, on that Gomberg for Mayor campaign was absolutely one of a lifetime experiences. We totally blew away the expectations of all the pundits who thought, maybe on a good day, Tucker's going to pull in 10,000 votes. Well, he pulled in 50,000 votes on that Gomberg for Mayor campaign, coming in second to the incumbent Mayor Mel Lastman, who we probably would have done a lot better against had he actually agreed to debate us, and we've been able to get out in front of the public so they could see the contrast of old Mel, standard. He was a, standard guy, standard mayor guy, pro-business, not very imaginative, not very nice, I guess, for social movements, for poor people, for the environment, these types of things. He was just a bit of a tool. Regardless, it was it was fun campaigning against him. One of the highlights of that campaign is we were in City Hall, and alongside the election, there was also a campaign and an effort for Toronto to find a place for all of its municipal garbage, because their local landfills were filling up and they needed a new landfill. So one of the ideas was to fill up a old abandoned and open pit mine in northern Ontario. They're just going to be trucked up there and dumped into this giant hole in the earth until it's filled, and then look for another place. So there was a lot of organizing against this scheme, and a lot of meetings in City Hall that we would attend to, and Tooker would try and get Mel Lastman's attention. And he was still, this is early on in the campaign, so Tooker hadn't yet challenged him to a debate, and Mel hadn't yet soured to Tooker's presence, which was kind of funny. Now, somebody had made up some t-shirts that's, Adam's Mine. That's the name of the mine. So someone made up some t-shirts that said "No to Adam's Mine." And we're in City Hall. We're right up at the front. There's only a small little railing barrier between the audience, if you will, and city council members, dozens of them, and then plus the mayor, Mel Lastman. And there's a little bit of a break, and the mayor's kind of walking around, and he's coming close, and Tooker's like, "Oh, Mayor Mel Lastman, hey, how you doing?" And he reached out his hand, and Mayor Mel sort of shakes his hand, and, "Oh, good to meet you." And they were kind of being cordial, even though Mayor was kind of figuring out that Tooker was coming for his job at that time. And Tooker had given him one of these t-shirts, "No to Adam's Mine." Now, of course, Mel Lastman was one of the proponents of Adam's Mine, to take all of Toronto's garbage and dump it up there. So Tooker gives him this t-shirt, and I'm standing right by there, and I've got the video camera. And I say, "Mayor Mel, show us the t-shirt." And he holds up the t-shirt like this. He wasn't really, I don't think he looked at it yet. So he holds up the t-shirt, and here's Mayor Mel Lastman holding up a t-shirt that says "No to Adam's Mine," which was hilarious. So I'm videotaping this, and we turned it into a still. And then one of the activists, Dave Meslin, who currently has a 6-part series on TVO. You should check that out. Anyways, Mez, as a young activist, very smart, very creative. He makes a whole bunch of copies of this photograph for the next day. When all the councillors show up, we're able to get a paper copy of this photograph on all the councillors' desks and the mayor desk. So when they all file in, they're all like, "What? Mayor Mel Lastman, no to Adam's Mine?" It was quite funny, and the mayor was very upset to have been tricked into making that photo. It was kind of funny. So from then on, the mayor, I guess, that was probably where it started, where he didn't really want to entertain the thought of being in the same space as old Tooker Gomberg. Another fun action that he partook during that campaign was dressing up as Robin Hood and heading down to the stock exchange, what they call it, Bay Street, down in Toronto, and just dressing up as Robin Hood, talking about the wealth inequality and the unfairness of our capitalist systems and how we need to do better, and we can do better on local levels. We took part in different anti-globalization protests that were happening at the time then, as well as even renting a streetcar and having a party on the streetcar to raise awareness and support for the Gomberg for Mayor campaign. So being an activist, it wasn't always getting locked onto something or participating in protests or writing letters or getting petitions or fundraising. There was a lot of fun stuff that was involved, and just being open to the possibilities that came on. It brought a lot of opportunities my way. And being friends with Tooker, that certainly helped, because he was super adventurous and he always had some kind of campaign going or another. So I got to connect with him in March. We were arrested together on the Coker action, blocking that equipment going up to Fort McMurray. In June, I was with him when he was arrested again, protesting against the World Petroleum Congress. And then by September, I'm with him. We didn't get arrested. I don't think there were any charges that were made during that Toronto campaign. However, he was detained by security, and one time during the Gauntlet Challenge was handcuffed and put into the back of a police car temporarily. He didn't win that election, as I mentioned. He came in second, The next morning, he's getting interviewed on the street. I think he's in his bathrobe, and one of the local media outlets wanted to come by for a post-election interview. So it's 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning, and I'm out there still doing my thing, still on the job. I'm videotaping the post-election interview for content, and the interviewer asked Tooker, "So what now? What's next for Tooker?" He says, "Well, I'm thinking of going to the Hague for the climate conference, which is taking place over the next couple of weeks." And that was kind of a shock. It's like, okay. So the interview wraps up. I'm like, wow, that's pretty exciting. Tooker, you're going to the Hague. When did you think of that? And I think he thought of it on the spot. He was a fairly fast thinker, very spontaneous in that regard. And then he asked me, he said, "Hey, would you like to join? Would you like to come along?" I said, "Absolutely, I would love to come along, but I haven't really been earning any money. I've only, that $20 per diem per day doesn't really go far. So if you can cover my travel expenses, I would be more than happy to join you." And soon we were off. So I think the plan was to leave that Friday. This was like a Tuesday morning or a Monday morning, and I had to burn down to the passport office. Back then, you could get a passport. I got an emergency quick passport in 48 hours. And by that weekend, boom, we're off to Europe, landing in Frankfurt, taking the train to The Hague, where COP6, so the United Nations Forum Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC COP6, Council of Parties 6, in the year 2000. Where countries of the world all come together every year. We're coming up on COP29 this year. So countries all come together every year to work out the logistics on how we can save ourselves from climate change and global warming. At the time, we were trying to negotiate and trying to determine how we were going to reach the goals of the Kyoto Protocol, which was signed in 1997. And I believe at that time, the plan was, or the goal was, to reduce carbon emissions 7% of 1990 levels. So whatever those levels were at 1990, the world agreed to reduce those by 7%. And we had a number of years in order to reach that, to gain that reduction. It was pathetically inadequate goal to begin with, which we didn't reach, and without getting into it too deeply right at this moment, climate change is kicked into high gear. We need 100% reductions at this point if we want to salvage ourselves in the future. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I hadn't even actually mentioned the last action that we did on the Gomberg for Mayor campaign in Toronto. Now, during the campaign, we had slept out overnight at City Hall in part effort to highlight homelessness and also to highlight the campaign platform on homelessness that Gomberg for Mayor was releasing. So we camped out overnight. We did that homeless action. On the last night of the campaign, we broke into, St. Margaret's Hospital? An old, disused, abandoned hospital in downtown Toronto. It was Tooker, myself, and Jean. We broke into that hospital, and we had bicycle locks that we then locked on to toilets and heating registers and whatever we could, and phoned the media and everybody and said, "Hey, we're locked on, and we want to open up this hospital, and we're going to stay here and open up this hospital for shelter space and for housing space for people that need it." And we managed to hold the space for the night. The police, they just ignored us. They didn't care. They're like, okay, well, whatever. They knew that we'd have to come out in the morning because it was voting day, and we needed to cast our vote. So we lasted the night. We squatted that hospital. We didn't get it busted open for any kind of shelter or housing for people that needed it, but we hope that action at least brought a little bit more attention to the issue. So the next day, we go and we vote. We celebrated the results as they were, and as I mentioned, within the week, off to The Hague we go, landing and trying to find a place. So this whole time I'm just following along. I'm totally letting Tooker lead this entire adventure. We had no plans. I had no money. I'm just dependent on him to figure it out where we're going to stay. So we end up in, I guess, it must have been the weekend that we left, because we land in Frankfurt, or we get to The Hague on Sunday, and there was a bit of a lull in the proceedings of the climate conference. There was the first weeks of meetings, then there was a big celebration for all the delegates, and then the next week of meetings were the important ones. That's where all the media showed up and all the activists showed up and everything. So we're at this lull in the events in the week. Sunday afternoon, we go and scout out the Congress Center in The Hague, which is right next door to the International Court of Justice, perhaps, or International Criminal Court. One of those courts that those jagoffs doing all the wars end up and should end up. Many of them don't. At any rate, we're scouting out this building and kind of going around, and Tooker notices on one of the bottom entrances, one of the service entrances, we find an open door. So we scurry into the Congress Center. There's nobody around. There's not even security guards. We might have seen one cleaning person or venue staff wandering around. So we kind of scout it out. We help ourselves to some reading materials. We found some event shirts that we grabbed, helped ourselves to, some swag bags and a few things, wandered around, got bored, and then left and wondering what to do. And we end up out on the streetcar platform. Tooker strikes up a conversation with a couple of delegates from the climate conference, and as it turns out, they were on their way downtown Hague for a party, a big to-do for all the delegates that was happening. So Tooker said, well, let's go to that party. Let's go check that out. So we cruise downtown. Of course, we don't have our credentials yet. We hadn't been in. It wasn't open enough for us to get our name tags. Even though we were set up, we were there as official delegates, official representatives of Now magazine from Toronto. So video activists, media activists, if you will. That was our official designation. We follow these folks downtown. We get to this venue. It's all there's hundreds of activists in the street, of course, protesting this lavish dinner that's being put on for the delegates while the planet burns and the oceans rise, and we're not dealing with the problem. Why are we having this big party? So we thought, as responsible activist journalists, we should get into that party and find out what's really going on. So Tooker follows these two in. They've got their credentials, and they're showing their credentials to the security. It's all fenced off, and there's one guy there, and Tooker, he's a small guy, and he's sort of slippery that way. He kind of weasels his way in, and he flashes some kind of bogus ID. He's got a whole collection of it. It's like Fletch, or you watch those movies of these undercover secret spies that got like a whole drawer of bogus IDs. Tooker was like that in real life. He had a number of different things that he could pull off. So he sort of squeezes his way through, and they're like, okay. And I was like literally right on the back of Tooker, and I got the camera on my shoulder for credibility, and I'm just kind of hanging on to him. I'm just like, well, I'm with him, and I just sort of followed his lead, and we got into this party. And it was like, holy cow, what in the world is happening in here? There was live music, there was free food everywhere, and drinks, and people dressed up in suits and gowns. It was nauseatingly lavish, crazy. We're jet lagged and tired, and poor, and probably hungry. So all that free food was nice, and I have to say the free drinks weren't too bad either. So we were in there, we're hanging out, took some video, but the scene just wasn't our scene, and we were getting tired anyways. So we bolt out of there, took some video out on the street of the activists, made a nice little interview. A lot of this stuff you can see on videos that I produced. I think one of them is on my website. Maybe I'll put the link to it again, not on my website, but my YouTube channel. I'll put the link again in the YouTube description here, and try and make it available for folks. So we made a couple of videos about that event, and this particular aspect of the video, you have to imagine it. We're outside. We're on the inside of the fence where the party is happening, which was a very rare experience. And on the other side of this giant fence, there are several hundred activists, and hooting and hollering. And they got their signs, and they got their drums, and it's at night, and it's a little bit chilly, and and they're doing their thing. I'm interviewing one of the campaigners, one of the activist spokespeople. In between the fence, there's all kinds of riot cops around. It was quite the scene. At any rate, we get out of there. We don't know yet, or I didn't know yet, what our plan was for the evening where we were going to stay. And Tooker had the bright idea of heading down to the harbor because he had heard that one of the Greenpeace ships, maybe it was the Rainbow Warrior, maybe it wasn't, but one of the Greenpeace ships was docked down in the harbor. So we should go down there and maybe they'll let us stay for the night. So we go down to the harbor, catch a cab, make our way down to the harbor with our backpacks and all our gear, and walk up to the boat. And there's a person on the deck, and they come. They were doing just nighttime patrol security around the deck, and wonder what we were doing. And Tooker says, "Hey, yeah, we're Tooker and Kelly, and we've worked with Greenpeace. We're from Canada. This is why we're here in the Hague, and we wonder if." So-and-so, the Greenpeace campaigner, the same gentleman who was with us on that Coker lockdown action in Alberta, 6-7 months earlier, Tooker was asking if that campaigner was aboard the ship. And as it turns out, yes, he was aboard the ship. So this campaigner, I wish I could remember his name, he gets fetched, he comes out, he sees Tooker on the dock, he's on the boat, and it's like, Tooker! And, it's this big reunion of lovers or something. It's all fine. We get up on the ship, and there was hugs all around, and he's like, absolutely, come on down. Yeah, you guys can stay the night on our ship, and it'll be awesome. So we go down into, the galley? This is the one and only time I've ever been on a ship, and on a Greenpeace ship to boot. It was quite exciting, even though we were only in dock. But we get to go on the ship, and lots of tales, and they fed us. We had some more food, and maybe some more drinks. I'm not sure. Maybe drinks weren't allowed on the ship. Can't remember. Regardless, it was quite an experience. And the next morning, we were off the ship. It's Monday, and we're all ready to hit that conference, both feet on the ground, running. So that was pretty exciting. It was a good start, and we're feeling pumped. We're feeling charged. Right, we've connected with the activists, we connected with Greenpeace, we had the inside scoop on the delegates crashing their party, got to sleep on the ship, and this is still, we're only 7 days out from the mayoral election. It's like we haven't even stopped since then. So we end up in the climate conference center, and we're wandering around, and there was one entire hall. So if you imagine like any giant conference hall, conference facilities, think of the expo center here in Edmonton, where there's all these big giant halls. Well, there was one entire giant hall that was dedicated just for the media. So there's got to be over 1,000 media from around the world, and all these trailers, like ATCO trailers, that were set up throughout the space that could be like little tiny offices for each of the designated media outlets. And then there was a big giant common area with monitors of the proceedings and computers that people could use. It was huge. Tooker ends up discovering a tiny little office that wasn't being used. It was, we don't know whose it was, whose office that was. Anyways, this tiny little office. It's empty, and Tooker discovers that the back end of this office on the ATCO trailer, the back end of this ATCO trailer, had an easy slide window. So he says, "Give me a boost." He opens the window. I boost him in. There's hundreds of people walking by the whole time. I boost him through this window. He opens the door. Bing, bang, boom. We've got an office to work out of at The Hague for the United Nations Forum Conference on Climate Change. It was pretty exciting. We had 2 desks, this tiny little space, tiny, 2 tiny little desks. There was a phone. There was a closed circuit TV where we could watch the proceedings from the conference. And we had a locking door. It was brilliant. And of course, power. We could charge up all our stuff. So it was just enough space. It wasn't comfortable that we could work. We could hold our stuff. Plus, at night, we could roll out our bags and crash. It was cramped and a little bit awful in that regard, but we're able to hold that space, which was pretty fun. So we slept in that tiny little office for 2 days. And on one afternoon, on the Wednesday afternoon, I had gone into the city to videotape a number of actions. I think there was an anti-nuclear march that was happening and some other actions that were going on. I was gone for several hours, and by the time I had got back to the conference center, Tooker found himself in some trouble again. Surprise, surprise. He was involved in one of the actions inside the conference center, whereupon the head of security ended up grabbing Tooker's lanyard, his ID, his credentials for being in the conference. He just grabbed it and took it and kept it. So now Tooker's inside the conference center without any credentials, which means he could be booted at any time. Also, if he left, there's no way he's going to be getting back in without those official conference credentials. That didn't deter him. He ended up finding one of the... He connected with an Irish television team who happened to have an extra set of credentials from one of their team members, Fanny. Can't remember the last name, but I thought the first name was pretty funny. So Tooker adopts Fanny as his persona, one of many, and he wears the lanyard extra long so that the lanyard's like hanging around his belly button. And Tooker's only 5.5 feet tall, if that, anyways. So you got to look down quite a ways to see that this spry little character's name is Fanny, and maybe that name doesn't fit the person. But regardless, we got away with it for the rest of the week. It was pretty funny in our little desk. But, actually, he got caught. It wasn't in an action that he got caught and had his security credentials taken away. He got spotted coming out of our squatted office where security was like, "Hey, you, what are you doing in that?" And then came over and snatched his ID. And we had to get all our stuff out of that office. Basically evicted from our little squat, where we ended up finding another one. We had to kind of traverse our way down through the halls of this big conference center. We went up to the very back corner, another unused space. It was a larger space, but there's nothing in it. There's no tables or chairs or monitors to watch proceedings or phone lines or anything like that. But we did have a locking door, so we were able to go in that space, take all of our stuff, and we had a safe space that security didn't find us for the next few nights that we ended up sleeping inside the Congress Center. It was quite an exciting situation. That being said, obviously the context of the situation was very dire. The delegates, the official governmental delegates and the scientists were not having any success in getting agreement on how we were going to reach the goals of the Kyoto Protocol. So it's like the entire global climate plan, the global climate movement was kind of crashing again, not really getting off the ground. So that was very sad. But on the upside, hey, we were doing something about it. We were involved. We were shooting video. We were getting involved with the activists. We were cooking up different schemes. And soon that conference was going to come to an end, come to a failing end, and it would be time to take action. Now this would be probably the largest, most high-profile action, certainly that I've taken part in my lifetime so far. And definitely a big action for Tooker, even though he was already quite high-profile. So stay tuned for next episode where I get into talking about the passport for Brunden, or the burning of the passports in The Hague, Netherlands, where two crazy Canuck journalists had enough with their government, and in protest, in front of all the world's media, hundreds of them, lit our passports aflame live on the internet, which again was a new thing. And yeah, we'll talk about that. It's quite exciting. So thanks for watching and listening this far. Appreciate that. Stay tuned. We've got more to come in the future. You know what to do. If you've enjoyed it, like, share, tell your friends, subscribe, do whatever. Doesn't matter. I'm not doing this for large audiences. Mostly inspired by an audience of one. But it occurred to me through the feedback and folks telling me after listening to the show the first time that these stories of my activism, it's kind of important stories. There's a little bit of important history in there, and it's also a little bit inspiring for others who are activists. Maybe they're getting back into it and they've burnt out, or maybe they want to become an activist, or maybe they just haven't seen the work that they've done in their life, in their community, as being activist centered. So at any rate, this is what these podcasts are about, my personal stories of activism in context with the rest of the world and what's happening. Soon, in upcoming episodes, we've got the Free Trade of the Americas agreement, where they just go nuts on civil society. 80,000 people show up in the streets of Quebec City to protest globalization, and the cops and the RCMP show up en masse. There's 5,000 chemical bombs released on us. There's special forces snatch squads grabbing Canadian citizens, kidnapping them off the street and throwing them into vans. Like, I'm not kidding. This stuff was happening in the spring of 2001. So we're going to get into that later on. Then we're going to get into the ramifications of how and what happened when the world changed on 9/11 and everything that's happened since. So we're not even 10 years into my own personal activism. We got another 13, 14 years to go in this series. I thank you for being with us so far. I look forward to hearing from you and hearing any comments or any tips or any feedback that you have on the work that I've been doing so far on these podcasts. Until next time, adieu.